and welcome to another edition of 10 for the Chairman. Not quite as frequent as we've done in the past, but there's a lot of other things going on, so it's not so easy for me to do them. And also, we're deep in development, a whole bunch of big features for this year. But today we have a special guest with me on 10 for the Chairman, Tony Zurvik, the director of the Persistent Universe, who will be here asking or answering the 10 questions asked by you guys. And we've done a bit of a departure now, which hopefully you guys will like, but the key here is that we are allowing everyone to vote on the questions. So as part of Spectrum, which is the new platform that we're rolling out for our forums and communication like chat and ultimately do via IP, it has the ability to upvote questions or posts or threads. And so I know it's been a common complaint that you didn't answer this question we wanted answered. That was a silly question to pick or answer, or why do people ask these basic questions? Well, now everyone has an opportunity to vote on the questions they want to have answered, and then may the best questions win. And so it's very important for all you subscribers to, if you care about having questions answered that you're interested in, go out and vote when we run these, because we'll be sort of running this on Spectrum, not just for 10 for the Chairman, but a bunch of other stuff. We're building more and more features to sort of support the ability to upvote and highlight content that you're all interested in. One of the next stages we'll be rolling out a new, the sort of Reddit / Stack Overflow thread kind of ordering, which also works on the same idea, which is one of the reasons why I think a lot of people in our community use Reddit, because it's easy to sort of figure out what the most, what people are interested in, or where most of the heat or most of the conversation is at. So it's very important for you guys to be involved in this. It's also good for us, or certainly for Jared and Ben and the rest of the community team, because they won't get blamed for picking the wrong questions. Now the people out there whose fault for the top questions will be you guys. So make sure you vote well. And the only thing I'll say is that we've taken the top 10 questions. There were two that me and Tony went through all the stuff in the order of the highest vote to the lowest vote. And there was a couple that we didn't feel like we would be able to give a very good answer to at this period. So we haven't answered those ones. So there's two that would have been in the top 10 that aren't answered. But other than that, we are answering it in reverse order of the most votes. So the last question we'll answer will be the one that you voted the most for. And the first one will be the 10th most voted for of the ones that we felt like we could answer. So having said that, hopefully you guys will find it interesting. And it's kind of a fun process for Tony and I, because we get to sort of discuss things that we've have plans for, or there's been a lot of design and even some implementation on, but it's always good to reconnect and sort of make sure that we're all on the same page and go from there. So the first question, number 10, comes from Klepto, who asks, will items and cargo on planets be in a visible storehouse, or will they disappear somewhere? You want me to give that one?
Yeah,
okay. Yeah, because I missed it. I like the visual stuff. So from the standpoint of the way that we're going to run it, is there's going to be a visual indication in the appropriate sort of commodities place. So not all commodities places necessarily will have sort of a warehouse window that you can see, but a lot of them will. And I really want that sort of feeling that maybe you had in Privateer when you went to the commodities exchange and you could see crates or boxes of the things that you could buy. Now, of course, if we're on a planet and there's 10,000 tons of something, we obviously can't fit it all in sort of your view of the storehouse. So what it really is representational of the general inventory that commodities, warehouse, TDD, broker area would have. And it's not dissimilar. In fact, it is going to be exactly the same system that runs the shops. So the shops themselves have an inventory. Obviously they're probably going to have a lot more guns or armor or weapons in the back room than they do out on the showroom floor. But what you see on the showroom floor, even when you go into a shop now, is a representation of what the inventory that shop is holding, and the same code that runs that is essentially the code that would run sort of the visual representation of a storehouse. And in fact, the sort of commodity exchange and the brokerage is, underneath it all, there's no difference between that really and a shop that you may buy weapons or armor or anything else. It's just really, it's a place that can buy or sell items. It has X number of items, and in the case of a commodities area, the price of it can fluctuate based on quantities. Price may or may not fluctuate so much in shops because they tend to have sort of smaller amounts. But you will be able to get a visible representation in a lot of cases, and that's very much consistent with our feeling of a kind of visceral, what you see is what you get world, which is, if you can see anything about Star Citizen, we're very keen on that.
Yeah, well, I would just add to that, there are a few practical limitations once you start talking about ship shops and some of the larger weapons and stuff. Actually putting them into that area and still giving you a significant selection becomes problematic. And so we may give you representative samples of some of the smaller weapons, and the bigger ones are basically just pick the size you want via these automated kiosks. Insofar as having that visual element, that's actually something that you've always been very consistent on, and that permeates a whole lot of what we're doing over on the design side. Like one of the more recent examples would be the shopping, to where some of the initial design actually went to more of a minimalistic design, to where you basically selected more like a Grand Theft Auto thing, to where you're selecting from a list, and one of the things you specifically wanted was to actually be able, it's that tangible aspect of being able to touch, see the white t-shirt, the red t-shirt, the shoes that look like this, and not just selecting it from a list of things. And so we're basically trying to implement that concept throughout the entire interface for the game.
Yep, that'll be good. As much as I like Amazon, it's still nice to go into a store and look at things in person. Okay, so the ninth most popular question, Steve Apollyon asks, are there any plans on cargo loading of the bigger ships, such as the whole series of ships, and is the loading at a space station or even planetary going to be automatic, or will we have specialized small cargo loading ships similar to Argo to load manually if we choose to, similar to the Argo?
Yeah, we have talked about the fact that we don't want the larger ships to basically just park it, click the button, and it's done. That these larger ships that have vast quantities of materials would actually take a significant period of time to unload, and may result in missions for NPCs and or other players to actually undertake. We've actually got a pretty comprehensive design right now, but we're still iterating through that, because we actually want to unify some of the functionality for loading and unloading, so that it's the same basic concept on the smaller ships as on the larger ships. And right now, what we've actually got in the design stage is something that works, I think, remarkably well on the smaller stage. It just doesn't scale so well when you start talking about, several orders of magnitude more materials, and how you don't bottleneck in terms of getting, potentially dozens or hundreds of other smaller ships to basically extract those resources. So we're still refining exactly how that's going to work, but that's the general direction, is that there is going to be commonality in terms of you will have the ability to work at a very localized scale, and then you'll be able to scale that very wide, so that there's content for a large number of players and or NPCs on these bigger ships.
So yeah, but are you answering whether it's automatic or not? So like the way I was viewing it is that, and I think that we maybe have this as a later question in the series, but when you go like on a sort of a big space station, like a big sport, like if I have a big container ship and I pull into the port of LA here at Long Beach, there's a whole setup. There's longshoremen, big cranes, and there's service, and the crew of the container ship don't actually unload the containers themselves. There's equipment that does it, and there's people that are paid to do that. And I would say that in general, in sort of the bigger sort of spaceports, you would have that same kind of setup where you would have the ability to unload the bigger ships, unload the containers. Potentially, we've talked about having the ability for players to sort of play the part of a longshoreman, if they're running around in a Largo and taking off a container from a Hully and dropping it to another place and doing that, or having AI do that. And then there obviously will be cases where, which is probably a later question we have here, but there'll be manual unloading and loading of cargo where you don't have the sort of big services. Like if I just had a ship and I was off the coast somewhere and there wasn't a port, then obviously I would have to be doing it myself. And so I think we've been looking at ways that you have the sort of automatic option that's the services provided.
Automatic option when appropriate, but the fidelity so that on these smaller ships you can actually, and this makes for much more interesting gameplay in a lot of times, in a lot of different cases, because you can imagine scenarios to where you need to deliver a smaller quantity, a half dozen, a dozen, specific crates of some sort of, illegal liquor or something to somebody at a planet. And part of the mission is not just, finding where to procure this stuff and then getting through, getting through customs without being detected, but once you're actually on the planet, now you've got to take these crates physically to that guy before he's actually going to give payment. And so all of a sudden you start to get into a much more localized problem to where you're trying to avoid security guards, or else you're going at night because you may be.
I think we have a question that basically answers the same thing a little later on. But
you threw everything off because you reversed everything.
I went from the big and the services to sort of break it down to the other one. Okay, so I think so the answer is there will be services, but we'll also have some specialized ships and equipment for unloading, cargo, especially in the case of the Big Hill series. All right, so the 8th most popular question comes from Yo, who asks, can you talk at all about what is in store for the salvage profession? Will it involve carving up ships for scrap or resources in the repair profession? Specifically, seeking out functioning or expensive parts of derelict ships, or some combination of those? Will this be like mining and require good scanning to effectively find salvable ships and stations?
I kind of break salvage down into two different concepts. One is what I'd call scavenging, which is when you're actually extracting entire pieces of value from other ships. Could be engines, could be weapons, could be cargo, whatever. And then there's also what I'd call scrapping, which is basically the extraction of the raw materials. You're actually pulling off, the metal plating from, the wings and stuff like that. And we've talked about, having these elements distributed in logical fashion so that the players that are more knowledgeable about where the most valuable elements and stuff are on a particular ship can strip the most valuable pieces that much more quickly. And so I think what you're going to wind up having is a tier of players. Some of them are interested in one thing or the other. Some of them are interested in only the most valuable parts, and then they quickly move on looking for other things, other things to scrap. Other players are basically looking at completely reducing a ship, down to just a husk and leaving no value behind.
Yeah, well, I mean, so to be more specific to answering the question, it is going to be a combination of both. So you'll be able to just take general sort of debris and essentially scrap it into whatever salvageable material that you'll be able to use or resell, and then you can also look to salvage working individual items. So if a wing blows off, but maybe it has a functioning gun on it that hasn't been damaged or damaged very much, if you can find that and detach it from the wing, then you've got a second-hand item you can sell. So both those are going to be part of the sort of salvage profession. And Tony sort of was talking about the next level, which is sort of scanning and sort of knowing the aspects of a ship that may be the best to salvage. So you don't want to maybe salvage the entire hull, but perhaps this part of the hull has whatever titanium armor and therefore is more valuable than another part of the hull. So that would be the part that you'd want to sort of salvage or dissolve into your sort of big salvage tank.
And one of the things I really like about that particular concept is that it scales really well to any number of players. In other words, when you think about a salvage ship as having one laser, whatever it is that's basically going to pull these materials off of there, you've got only a single player that can actually engage in that. And if you want more, maybe we could add a second, a second one of these devices, but you're going to still be very limited. If you start to turn this into something to where players with their individual, hand-controlled stuff can basically extract things, then you have two things. One is it becomes very time-consuming at that level, at a personal level, to basically to scrap an entire ship. But it's actually still very cost effective if you have done this enough such that you know where all the most valuable areas are, and that's all you're going to bother with. And so what I would say is when you're talking about scrapping the entirety of a ship, that's probably going to be, you're going to aim the fire hose at it, the big dedicated device. And when you're talking about just extracting bits of value quickly, get in, get out, maybe because there's a lot of residual dangers in that area, then it actually becomes very effective to have you and 4 or 6 guys, which may be other players, friends of yours, maybe other NPCs that you've hired, to just attack it in mass, just hit the valuable points, the valuable parts, and then move on.
Yep, absolutely. So there you go. All those things will be there. So I think salvaging will be quite fun, and graphically we kind of already handle it with the damage shader, because you can sort of dissolve off the surface in a more regular pattern, and that's you're taking off the top of the hull for salvage.
This is a great example of where we're reusing technology, from one purpose to another, and we're actually going to do the same thing. Repair is actually going to be largely the inverse of this process, to where you take raw materials that you've stored in your ship, and you can dispatch 3 or 4 or 6 guys, or the big, dedicated device, depending upon how quickly you want to move across the entire ship, and repair just select areas.
Yep. All right. So the 7th most popular question comes from Cryo Commander, who asks, in both cargo running and mining, what types of hazards can we expect? Understandably, there will be the threat of pirates, but what other dangers will we run into, i.e. hitting a combustible methane vent while mining, or the consequences of a container malfunction during transport?
This is actually one of my favorite ones, because I like the concept of exploration, discovery, and just as I'm flying, going about my business, doing one thing, maybe mining or whatever, I'm encountering other stuff. And so in terms of the things other than pirates that might kick you out of quantum travel for a period of time, this would include everything from meteoroid showers, comets, derelict ships that cross your path, debris fields, micro black holes, just a variety of things like that. And the most interesting aspect about this, I think, is that all of these things that you encounter can not only have potential value to you, even though you're currently engaged in something else, because this represents information. If you cross paths with a comet, and that comet's not known to anyone else, then you can actually sell that information, which may be very valuable to somebody that wants to actually mine it. You start thinking about debris fields and derelict spaceships, and those are very valuable to these guys that want to engage in salvaging operations. And micro black holes are very interesting to scientists that actually want to be able to study these things to extract value from them. And so you can see this whole circular ecosystem, to where as you're going about your business, you're encountering things both directly and indirectly that can feed other parts of the economy. The other thing that I really like about this particular aspect is just the variety that it's going to bring when you start getting all these players interacting in all these different ways.
Yeah, well, I'd also say that the other things, obviously we've talked about, if you're mining, potentially hitting, a gas vent that could cause an explosion, and those sort of things. Cargo and in general, just transit. We've besides things you can encounter, we very much have we have this high fidelity of sort of simulation of the various components of your ship, and part of the big pink unicorn of item 2.0 is the fact that we have age and wear, and things will break down. So that's not currently in the game as you guys are playing it, but it's very much part of the systems that will be part when the full item 2.0 comes online, which means that under stress, being used a lot, say on a long quantum drive, like if you're on on a trading cargo run or something, the items, your power plant, your engine, your thrusters, lights, whatever, they can, they have age, they can fail, they can misfire. And so there will definitely be a certain amount of maintenance keeping your ship running, especially in the bigger ships. Mm-hmm. So, if you've, watch any science fiction movie and, you've seen Chewie banging at his Millennium Falcon, or, the crew of the Nostromo having to keep their ship running and stuff like that. That is going to be a gameplay component besides just things that, pirates that you can run across and everything like that. So it won't even, because we've mentioned that with the real vast scale that we have in the game, because it's not we're not sort of compressing the star systems the way a lot of other space games have. I mean, we are compressing it because if we went full real scale, then it would take way longer for people to travel across one solar system than I think people would enjoy. But we are still having a massive amount of scale, much more so than other games will have, and therefore when you're in quantum drive at 0.2 speed of light, which is very fast, you theoretically could spend half an hour to go from one side of a star system to another side of the star system. Now, likelihood is you'll never be in quantum drive for that long because you'll be pulled out for some reason, there'll be something in your way or whatever, but you could quite easily be in quantum drive for a few minutes, 5 minutes or whatever, and 10 minutes, and part of, we don't want you to be bored, so you're running around, there'll be things for you to do to keep your ship running while you're doing that, so it's sort of like, travel gameplay, and that will be one of the parts of being sort of, a long distance explorer or a cargo hauler, where you'll actually have things to do like you would if you were a sea captain on a container ship crossing the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific.
You mentioned boredom, and that kind of goes back to that sense of discovery that I was talking about. We don't want these things that pull you out of quantum travel to always be viewed, if you're currently doing something else, as just an annoyance. We actually want to make these things indirectly entice players to occasionally, break off what they're doing and explore a little bit more. And there's a variety of ways by which we can do that. If you think about, I'm currently mining and I basically loaded up my ship with ore and I'm heading, over to the refinery, and all of a sudden you're kicked out of quantum travel and you've got a ping on your radar, and all you know is at this distance it's a ship, and at conventional, at cruise speeds, it's 3 minutes away. Do you now basically start spooling up your quantum engines, after you've course corrected to get around it, and you're going to go ahead and jump out? That's a possibility. But the information that there's a derelict ship there, when you don't know anything about it, its current state, whether it's already been salvaged, what type of ship is, that information is worth much less. Or do you go off the beaten path, and now you're actually going to invest 3 minutes to go, you were mining, but it seems safe, so I'm going to head over there, I'm going to get a little bit closer. Oh, well, now I know what type of ship it is, I'm going to go a little bit closer still. Well, now, now I can actually see that it hasn't actually been scrapped. There's a lot of value here. This key that I have is now extraordinarily valuable when I go to sell that information to someone else. But I got a little bit too close, and it turns out there's already some other people, pirates that have pulled up, or scrappers, and they don't want anyone else to have this information. So now they're moving to basically take you out so that you can't basically alert other players, and bring them there. And so all of a sudden, you wanted to extract a little bit of value about something you just incidentally ran into, and you ventured a little bit too close, and now you've basically walked into not something that was intentionally meant as a trap, but it works out that way nonetheless.
Yep, no, it'll be when a lot of this stuff's all working, we have a big, a much bigger play field, which is, in the offing. That's what we're working on right now. I think the gameplay possibilities and fun is going to be much better. Much better than it is now, but I think it'll be something really special. So that's going to be cool. All right, so let's carry on. The sixth most popular question comes from Poison Taco, who asks, with 2.6 and 2.6.1, Star Marine has started to introduce destructible props in the game, shattered glass, explosive barrels, and etc. The most recent monthly report mentioned the team was looking to add more props and items that can be destroyed in the game. Presumably this work will carry it on into the persistent universe. Have you put any thought into how destroyed props will be restored in the persistent universe? Example being, if a player could shatter the glass windows in Port Olisar, how would the game reset to a point where the windows are replaced? So this is something that we're focusing on long term. So it's part of what we've talked about persistence. We have the very basic version of persistence that rolled out last year, but we don't have full persistence, as in the full persistence is persisting state of you as a character, your ship, other items, other locations around the world. And persisting state is important for whether things are damaged, whether there's a window broken or something like that. So that is actually part of the roadmap that we have this year that we're working on, is bringing in persistence, more and more persistence as we go. So we'll be able to persist state of pretty much most things, as well as where they are, what the location. So if you go down on a moon and you drop an item or leave a ship there, and leave that area, which means it's going to go out of memory in your computer, and then you come back to it, depending on the importance of the item, we want a persistent, which means it will be persisted to the online database that we keep all, that's basically sort of the online cloud save game for the entire universe, and your ship should be there. Now, obviously, if you drop a gun wrapper and you leave the area, we don't want to clog up the game with millions of gun wrapper items. So small items that don't mean much, like bullet shells or whatever, would just be discarded if you left the area. But certain items, especially items that you would own, like a spaceship or something, will persist and stay around, and that's what we call the entity owner manager. So there's basically a manager that would sort of manage like what's in your ship, like in the cargo hold, or what you're owning, or what's inside a space station, or what's on an area in a planet, and then that's what's responsible for managing the persistence of these items, of whether they stay or not, and then also as serial, and then the items themselves are saving off their state. And so what that means is, for something like Port Olisar, if we wanted to allow you to break or destroy common areas, which is another discussion, because we don't want someone blowing out a window in an area where everyone else is, and killing all the people hanging out in the space station. So there will definitely be some areas where we will not allow you to have player-generated mayhem. But there certainly could be the cases, like you already see in the comm satellite missions, where you're asked to go and turn them back on or not. Well, we're definitely going to have stuff where there'll be a space station or a satellite relay that's been damaged or broken by an AI, or maybe even by a player, and then that will automatically generate a mission inside our system to say, hey, come and repair me, and then players or AI could respond to it, and they would go there and repair it, and then its persistent state would go from damage to functional again, and if it's broken, the cycle starts again.
That's how I kind of read the question, which is basically we'll have two different tiers of repairs, I would say, and one of them is significant enough such that it warrants the creation of missions, and this will be damaged, satellites and things of that sort, and if a player doesn't do it, then an NPC will. Then there's also just the more stuff, I would say it's more cosmetic. Windows getting shot out in in Area 18, and there's always going to be players there, and so it won't be so much an issue of, well, when the players all go away, then we can just go ahead and reset things. That will be handled more by just the NPC community. There will be NPCs that actually do salvage, not salvage, that basically do maintenance, maintaining of a given area. And when you break glass, when you basically shoot barrels of trash and garbage get scattered about, some of the NPCs would have the responsibility of fixing that up, cleaning things up, etc. Which makes for that much more of an interesting world, because not only can you break things in interesting fashion, but you actually see the NPC community put it all back together.
You're off in prison because you're a vandal. All right, not a vandal, a vandal. All right, so the fifth most question comes from Lethality, who asks, regarding cargo hauling, can you clarify how the loading and unloading, I would say, of ships will work at both the initial launch of the cargo system and what the long-term vision of the cargo system will be? There has been some confusion regarding manual loading / unloading, with all the cool logistics that presents, not to mention all of the maglev containers and hand jacks, ! So I'm thinking Lethality wants to physically load and unload. And this is sort of an extension or along the lines of what we're talking about with the bigger Hull C class a little earlier on in 10 for the Chairman here. As we were saying, we are going to have both. So there is going to be physical loading and unloading, and there'll also be, whether you want to call it automated or AI loading or unloading, in sort of bigger spaceports or bigger landing areas, because that's generally what would happen in those cases. But there's definitely going to be gameplay that would involve you, say, flying out supplies to a remote outpost, and there is no people there to help load or unload it, and you have to unload it. Or you come across, some stuff you want to get that's floating in space, and you have to load that in manually and do all the rest. So there is going to be both loading and loading physically, which we already have shown a small amount of, like if you looked at the Gamescom, demo that we did of, going to the moon after visiting sort of Levski and Delmar, and there were some crates, little containers, and we picked it up and we're taking it to the freelancer we were flying at the time. You know, that is an example of sort of the more sort of granular physical loading and unloading. There will be equipment that will allow you to move bigger containers around, so we have sort of standard size, larger cargo containers, and that will have sort of a kind of Gravlev jack stuff, and potentially there'll be other kind of, you know, whether we create some vehicles or things like the Argo to move you know, smaller stuff around and then load it up onto bigger stuff. I think we're going to have both. I mean, I don't know if you want to elaborate on it, Tony, because we already talked a bit about it.
Yeah, that's basically it. To me personally, like the most interesting stuff is actually when you're dealing with smaller quantities that you actually have to hand load, because it just makes for more interesting mission scenarios when you don't want to just deliver it to the shop. Now I actually have to basically, you know, travel through space with this, you know, material that I procured, you know, land, and then I have to do that last leg, and now I'm on foot, and it's just a completely different type of experience, different types of challenges we can throw at the player.
I would also say that, like, smuggling would be a case that you're not going to have.
A super tanker full of fuel becomes hard to justify as smuggling. That's exactly it.
You know, like, so we're gonna, and there's gonna be all sizes of, you know, like there can be items that you could hold in your hand that you would potentially smuggle or carry, like, I mean, diamonds or something could be, gems could be an example of that, to really, you know, massive containers that are just full of ore or, you know, liquids or whatever. And so there's all kinds of it. So there is going to be, you know, besides the sort of big bulk cargo, because, you know, you've got sort of bulk cargo stuff, then you've got more bespoke, like, you know, if I was collecting, I don't know, you know, sort of rare, like, I don't know, space truffles. So, you know, space truffles don't come in massive ton container things. There would be small little boxes of it, but they'd be worth a lot of money. So that would be something that you would probably take personally around, and then of course you have smaller things like, you know, like I was mentioning, gems, or perhaps, you know, contraband, or you know, you're smuggling drugs or things that you shouldn't smuggle. And those particular ones you would have to, you know, put away in a hidden compartment that was shielded, hope you don't get scanned or boarded by the advocacy, and then when you get on the planet, you're going to have to, you know, Han Solo style, you know, sneak it off your ship. So that's the beauty of having it all based on essentially a kind of you know, at a character level, a first person level. Yeah, because it's not just about the ship; it's about also those extra mechanics once you've landed, and how do I get past the guards with this stuff? And so I think that's going to add a whole bunch of like fun gameplay.
That's to me. You know, I've said before, it's like I tend to get, you know, bored fairly easily if I'm not constantly presented with, you know, different types of challenges, and so I like the ability to, you know, take, you know, the high-level concept of cargo transport and basically extend it such that it doesn't just involve ships, but you've actually got, whether you're, you know, getting the stuff and then you need to get it back to your ship and then do the space travel, et cetera, or whether you've landed with your ship and then you need to actually get it to the guy in the back alley without security seeing you, or, you know, whatever the case may be, or, you know, or you're carrying something really valuable, and now since you're actually holding this, you're at a disadvantage because it takes you a couple seconds longer to actually drop that, pull your weapon, and so you're actually more vulnerable when you're running through the seedy tunnels of Levski or something like that. And so all of a sudden you can see players starting to do this mental calculus and thinking, well, am I going to go on my own? Do I basically try to recruit a few friends? Do I hire an NPC bodyguard as I'm doing this? And it's all that variety that, you know, to me makes it really interesting. Every player is going to go about it in a little bit different fashion.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's you know, I mean, because obviously I read what people you know, write out on our forums and elsewhere, but there's a lot, like people go, oh, well, you know, what about, I want to know more about game mechanics or whatever, but in reality there's a huge amount of sort of essentially what people would normally consider game mechanics or gameplay that comes out of us building these sort of core systems.
Yes.
And, you know, we've really been pushing a building, and it's been taking longer than obviously we were thinking it was going to take, and partly that's because we're building it to work at a scale and across, you know, a huge universe and with, you know, millions of players ultimately. But, you know, our belief is that if we build, you know, these systems that are super flexible, so like, you know, we've talked about Item 2.0, and I think in the last studio update from LA, we showed a little prototype of sort of the interaction. And if you take a look at the interaction, that's not an interaction system that you see in any FPS game. I mean, it's like you can pick things up and use them and plug them into something else, and then put a battery into something to turn it on, and open up compartments and take. So you have this ability to sort of manipulate items and use them, and they have the ability to do what you would normally, like a battery provides power, and then if this radio needed power, then you put it in. Now suddenly the radio can work, and then maybe that will help you achieve something else. And so we have, we're basically building this system, and and a good example of it is like what we're talking about with the smuggling, because all the stuff that we're talking about in general falls out of the system of being able to physically own and manipulate places, put stuff in areas and all the rest of the stuff. So all we have to really do on top of that is just determine that these items are illegal, and the AI logic for the law enforcement, the advocacy, whoever, is if they catch you with it, you're in trouble. But in general, the manipulation, the hiding of it, all the rest, that all falls out of like the scanning stuff that we've been working on, the item manipulation stuff that we're working on. So a lot of our professions we've talked at the base level of what we want to have for 3.0 kind of fall out of these fundamental core mechanics that we've been working really, really hard on. But I think once they're done, it's just going to provide a platform beyond quite a ways beyond what you can currently do in 2.61, and that's when I get excited. So that's
We've talked about this a number of times before, to where basically you build the system and you get it set up properly. Then it requires very little tweaking to affect a lot of gameplay, a lot of interesting gameplay potential. And this is basically the route we've gone, since from the very beginning. So we didn't want to go the route of having to custom code each one of these things. And then the addition of new content becomes an enormously difficult task and then you see this in a lot of other games, to where the amount of content, the amount of new content that you can release always lags behind what the players can actually experience. They usually go out, they experience the new content, and then they basically just run in circles for the next 12 months until the next big update happens. And in this case, we wanted to eventually be able to get to the point to where we can put in place what I'd call a functional world, and then basically we just give you entry points into that, and everything else just more or less falls out of that.
We're getting closer, so I think people will appreciate it when it's there. All right, so the fourth most popular question is from Cap, who asks, will we be able to move between professions fluidly, or will we have to requalify per profession if we decide to switch to something else? So that's a pretty simple one to answer, is absolutely you can move between professions fluidly. We don't want to gate you as a player. We don't have pre-rolled skills for you. I mean, this kind of comes down to this sort of system versus like different mechanics set that, like, an RPG game, you would design like different mechanics or sets for, like, oh, here's my smuggling rule set, here's my cargo rule set, here's my mercenary rule set, and it would have all these separate things, and you would be sort of, I'm either this or I'm that. Whereas with us, we're not. We just basically figure we try to simulate an open world. Obviously we're not simulating to the level that real life is, but we're trying to approximate it. And then we sort of let you pick what you want. So really your ability to perform different professions, whether you want to haul cargo or you want to be a mercenary, is more down to the equipment you have. And then also there will be some level of access for missions. Like, for instance, no one's going to trust you to take a whole bunch of valuable cargo until you've done enough missions that have sort of proven yourself as a reliable cargo hauler.
That's the key point to me. That's the key point to me, which is there are no technical limitations in terms of you doing this, but we still want to have, just like in the real world, we want to give players the ability to progress. And by that I mean that there will usually be entryway points where you can kind of do the junior mining missions, you can do the junior security missions, whatever it is. Then you will build up a personal reputation that's global. Everybody knows how good you are in general at this at this particular profession versus that one, etc. And that opens the door to additional missions. And And then there's another layer beyond that, which is, well, you can be incredibly, you can be an incredibly well-known criminal, but that doesn't mean that the mafia boss here personally trusts you. And so then you get into the personal relationships to where, well, I've basically worked my way up and I've become real.
I think we're just answering the second most popular question.
Okay, well then.
So yes, you'll be able to move fluidly between professions. Okay, the third most popular question comes from Kenzie Snow, who asks, with the recent progress update on the Prospector, is it safe to assume that we will have ship-based mining to some degree with the launch of 3.0? So the quick answer is yes, it is something that we are absolutely trying to achieve. So
I would say we're shuffling.
Be able to do some version of basic mining by 3.0. It may not be the final,
the full set. And we're looking at what we can trade off, what would be more interesting, to the player community, what naturally falls out given the development trajectory, what we could pull in a bit more easily than we originally thought, and at the same time, what's basically a little bit more difficult. And so we're shuffling some of the 3.1, 3.0, 3.2 things.
We're moving some stuff around because when we first talked about 3.0 sort of last half of last year, we originally had in mind a simpler set of functionality and features that we were going to do. But once we sat down and said, well, if we're doing this, we kind of need to do this, we kind of need to do this, it ended up being a lot more stuff to really kind of deliver. I mean, basically it was like anyone else's shipping game. Functionality, and so I think I said it before, but we started with so what we put up on the cards was this much, and now we've got Confluence pages of like this much, and at least 4 to 5 times as many of the systems and features than we were originally thinking. So what's happened is that obviously means 3.0 is taking a bit longer than we were thinking, but it also means that certain things like when ships are available and some of the professions we thought we could get to, we may move things around because some of the stuff, so mining is an example of this, some of the stuff will have equipment like ships, like whether it'll be salvage or mining or whatever before. So mining is definitely one that's on our radar, and we'd like to do it because it's a kind of a basic, it's a resource collection.
We're looking
profession.
We're looking to
really
trade that one forward. Trade it for some other stuff. I think that I think that there's a lot of players that would very much appreciate that type of gameplay versus some of the other stuff that we talked about being in 3.0. I think it would actually give us a much more well-rounded set of professions, initial professions. I would also point out that, so you mentioned how we're thinking about it in a little bit more, in a little bit larger terms in terms of the sum total of functionality that you'll be able to engage in. But the initial tier of stuff is actually, there's an entire tier of functionality that we think we can actually get to, and like you said, it's not the entire mining experience, but it's still going to give players a whole lot of interesting gameplay.
Yeah, definitely. So, all right, the second most popular question from Dr. Murray is, to effectively perform a job, will we need to qualify for them beforehand, like earning a certain amount of rep, or will it be easy to get started as having the right kind of ship? So we were kind of discussing this on the previous question about moving professionally between professions fluidly. So to do a job, like if I just want a cargo haul, if I've got a ship that can take cargo, I'll be able to get basic cargo missions. But if you want to get the more interesting or the more lucrative ones, then you'll have to sort of build your rep up, whether it's going to be with the Merchants Guild or someone that's a cargo broker or something like that. That much like the mission giver that we sort of showed at Gamescom last year, we'll have characters out there that will be giving you sort of higher grade missions that pay better, that are maybe a bit more interesting, a bit more challenging. And so you sort of have to kind of prove your mettle, and then you get a certain rep, as you were saying, and then you can move on to the sort of more interesting missions. But if you just want to haul cargo and you've got a freelancer, yeah, you absolutely will be able to start doing that, and then it's up to you how far you want to go in that profession.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of the smaller ships to where you could potentially fit, a small number of, crates and stuff, 4, 6, 8, 20 crates, and the amount of cargo that you can haul is obviously going to affect what type of thing that you might be looking to transport. In other words, I mentioned earlier, illegal liquors and stuff, which a dozen crates of that could actually have a pretty hefty profit margin. When you're talking about hauling commodities, probably not so much. You're usually talking about, unless you're talking about some of the more valuable ones, you're usually talking about greater quantities. You need a larger ship. The ships in general tend to move slower. Therefore, you may want a security escort. And on and on and on.
Okay. And the number one most upvoted question on Spectrum was from Daryl, who asks, will there be an autopilot in ships traveling from point A to Z, and will that allow me to get up and move around? So the answer is yes. We were already talking about if you're in quantum drive, you'd potentially have to move around your ship to fix whatever, a fuel rod that goes bad, or there's a leak somewhere, or there's a fuse breaks. So I mean, we were talking about this before. We were sort of discussing that you probably should be able to set an autopilot like singular point distance. So not just for quantum drive, but maybe even just traveling at normal like SCM or cruise speeds, and then you can sort of leave the helm and walk around. And then, of course, if your ship is going to hit something, whether it's in quantum drive or in regular, space mode, it would pull you out. It would basically stop. It's sort of like one of those auto-sensing brake systems.
And this kind of segues into the whole crew functionality, to where not only can you go off and do something, but you actually have a navigator. You can turn over control of the ship to him and basically give him just some basic high-level commands. In other words, I'm in conventional travel. I say go over there. It's 5 minutes of flight. I'm going to go check on my cargo, or I'm going to basically go affect repairs and engineering because I just took some damage, and I can actually give him just some basic instructions. What do you do if we come under fire? Do you stop? Do you basically try to quickly escape? Do you basically take evasive maneuvers? And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about on one of the previous segments, to where you'll be able to control your crew, but at a very high, very macro level. We're not going to turn it into this micromanagement game. But if you've actually made the investment, you've got another pilot, you've actually paid for somebody that's got a significant level of experience, then you're all the way back in engineering. It's going to take you 60 seconds to get to the bridge. He needs to do something to basically not make you a sitting duck for the pirates that basically
so the
you
bottom
just ran
line
across.
is, if it's just you solo, you do the autopilot. It's simple. Point A to point B will stop you, so you don't hit anything. But if you have crew and you have tell them to take the helm, and you go to the back to fix the engine, that crew can operate at a higher level. They can not only stop but evade fire, or try to escape the area, or do something while you're heading back to take the helm back.
Which is interesting just too, because that doesn't really involve any new coding on our side, because we've already got NPCs that know how to pilot spacecraft. So all we're really doing is giving you an interface to to this technology that we've already set up for other things.
Yep. All right, there you go. That is the 10 most voted questions on Spectrum by subscribers for 10 for the Chairman here. So it's been kind of fun answering the questions here. And haven't been getting to do this that much recently, because I've been doing a lot of travel between all the different studios. But we're going to try to have sort of 10 for the Chairman. Will definitely be happening, but also maybe some of the other disciplines that we have. And we'll be using the features of Spectrum, which are only going to get better, to allow you guys to really sort of ask the ones that you care about, and not rely on us to pick the best ones. It's much better for you to tell us which ones you really want. So I think on the 10 for the Chairman side, I think we're going to try to do at least once a quarter, maybe a bit more. We'll see what happens on my travel schedule and everything. But we would like to be providing this kind of feedback with you on questions for the game. We've got the subscriber town halls, things like that. So thank you all for supporting us to be able to shoot this extra stuff, and thank all the you guys out there and girls that have backed the game to allow us to make it. With that, I would say good night. What are you going to say? say, Tony?
Thanks again for all the support. Without you guys, none of this would be possible.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.